U.S. Despite the Nixon administration's frantic efforts to suppress the news, the facts are becoming all too clear. The bombing is bringing death to thousands of Vietnamese children, men and women. Homes, hospitals, schools, churches, airfields, and power plants have been demolished. Hanoi and Haiphong are being systematically leveled, and tens of thousands of persons are fleeing the cities for what may prove to be a non-existent refuge in the countryside. Mr. Nixon cannot hope to obliterate North Vietnam without the world knowing it. A crime of such enormous proportions cannot possibly be concealed. Stunned by the heavy resumption of bombing above the 20th parallel, millions of angry Americans are asking what happened to Mr. Nixon's pre-election pledge to end the war and Mr. Kissinger's assurances that peace was at hand. As the truth sinks in about the staggering destructiveness of the bombing, a sense of horror and revulsion is sweeping across the country.
I and other members of Congress will be raising this issue at the caucus of all Democratic members of the House of Representatives, which will be meeting in Washington on January 2nd, the day before Congress opens. It is our view that the Democratic Party, which is the majority party in Congress, must give leadership on moves to end this war once and for all. Congress has the power to do so. It must decide to exercise that power to cut off funds for the war and fulfill its constitutional responsibility to assert its authority on matters of war and peace. And the public must make certain that it pressures the caucus as well as the Congress itself to do so. If the bombing is not stopped on January 20th, and if the war is not ended by January 20th, then I hope that all Americans who hate this war will come to Washington on Inauguration Day. By their visible presence, they must let the President know that he is not their president until he does end the war, and that they will not be accomplices to his vengeful and brutal policy of mass bombing of civilians and hospitals or parties to the results of a fraudulent election in which millions of Americans were duped into believing that the war would be over and our prisoners home by Christmas.
B-52s dropped millions of pounds of bombs on the Vietnamese. In concert with other anti-war groups, trade unionists, members of Congress, blacks, students, women's peace organizations, educators, POW relatives, authors, clergy, and others, the National Peace Action Coalition has issued a call for massive anti-war demonstrations in Washington, D.C. and other cities on Saturday, January 20th, Inauguration Day. Last night, all the necessary permits for the January 20th demonstration are being secured. The demonstrations are being organized as peaceful, non-confrontational manifestations of public outrage against Nixon's inhuman and barbaric bombing of the peoples of Indochina, and to demand that the United States end its war of aggression against the peoples of Indochina now. National Peace Action Coalition will do everything possible to unite the overwhelming majority of people in this country who oppose the war, to bring them into action, to act decisively and in large numbers to end the war now.
If this nation can make one collective New Year's resolution, it must be to end the war in Indochina before the President is inaugurated on January 20th. As he did last year, President Nixon chose to torpedo the Paris peace negotiations and to resume mass terrorist bombing when Congress was not in session to call him to account, and when the American people were preparing for their traditional celebration of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Between now and January 3rd, When the 93rd Congress convenes, Americans must concentrate their efforts on getting their elected representatives and senators to act to halt the bombing and to insist that a peace agreement be signed, as the Nixon administration had agreed to do before the election. Be said of us.
Hunter is a representative of the Cleaners and Dyers Union, Local 239, not 139 as it is on your sheets. Local 239 here in New York. Ms. Hunter is an outspoken...
that the President promised peace. If you recall, it was on October 26th that the President's representative, Mr. Kissinger, said peace was at hand. And I think that generally speaking, the President in his campaign, what little campaign he conducted, gave the impression to the American public that the war was being ended by him. So I think he has had 2 mandates in 2 elections now to end this war, and I think he's violated both of those mandates. And I think that there is a strong mandate exactly to end this war. And the violation of it is quite evident. Just because he was elected, I think he has the responsibility to end this war, because that's why people also elected him.
Do you think that perhaps the White House has misinterpreted the mandate by believing that the stated policies before the election to end the war honorably or whatever? Do you suppose that the White House has misinterpreted the American...
We're dealing with a great deal of lies and deception. The fact is that Mr. Kissinger said peace was at hand. He had 99%. The agreement was at hand. The other side said it was a 100% agreement. It was really to be signed October 31st. There is no evidence of any kind except that we have allowed President II and a different concept to take hold. There's no other evidence that there's any reason for the breakdown of this agreement which was at hand. So either Mr. Kissinger should resign because Mr. Nixon double-crossed him, or he should be fired because he double-crossed Mr. Nixon. But as the spokesman for Mr. Nixon, who never denied the statements made by Mr. Kissinger, it's quite clear that it's the American people, the people of the world, the people in Vietnam, who have been defrauded and deceived by the President. The Pope, the head of the United Nations, the heads of nations, all over this country and this world, people are responding with tremendous shock. Hawks and doves alike, I may add. And I think the time